What is going on, guys? You know what? We don't know either. Jimmy Smith, Ryan Moody.
Not your normal intro. What's going on?
We don't know. We don't know. I will say one thing. There's a podcast-only version set just hours before the cancellation of UFC 249, which I will say, if you want some incentive to go listen to the podcast, it actually is very foreboding as to what took place. So I guess really the first thing we need to address, which we kind of alluded to in the pre-show that will never air on YouTube, Rose Namajunas personally impacted by this issue. We certainly hope the best for her and her family. In my opinion, anyone upset about these fights not being put on, or really anything along the fights just in general, that should probably help put this in a little bit of perspective for you. She should never have been asked to fight or even expected to fight. And I do know from what I saw, people were kind of pushing back just a little bit against her for not, coming out initially and withdrawing from the fight and stating why. So with that said, here's the deal, Jimmy. You actually brought up some really interesting points in the last podcast, in that what the UFC ultimately wanted caused their downfall. And in this situation, there's no two ways around that. For a sport that wanted to be mainstream, for a sport that wanted to have an athletic deal, for a sport that needed to have a broadcasting partner, in the end, it was the broadcasting partner that did them in. Disney and ESPN Plus told Dana White to stand down, and he had no choice but to do otherwise. And I think that probably shows the direction they wanted this to take. I know we'd mentioned maybe there was some pressure on Dana to put together a card, but ultimately, in what has to be a little bit of poetic justice, the sport that used to use the tagline "as real as it gets," the guy that came out to be defiant to every single guideline presented to him, ultimately had to bow down to the one person he signed most of his company away to, and really wasn't even his company to begin with, ESPN.
That's the deal. You want to be legit? You want to be on ESPN? You want to have backing worth billions of dollars? You want distribution? You want deep pockets? You're not the boss then. And I'm not insulting Dana White. I'm not, I'm just stating the obvious. And then if you want to be big, you want to be mainstream, there's a sacrifice to that. This isn't the Wild West anymore. I used to fight on Indian reservations quite a few times. My first, all my fights except, the last couple were on Indian land, Native American land. So to me, it's like, if you want to move past those years, you can't go back there. Fine, we're just going to do what we did 20 years ago. It's not happening anymore. Doesn't work that way. So the necessary evolution of the sport caused this for Dana, this problem. Well, it's, and he did everything he could, and I understand his motivations, and I'm not sitting here rah-rahing and haha, told you so. I don't feel that way. I'm very conflicted about UFC 249. I want fighters to get paid. I want life back to normal. I want, something to talk about in terms of MMA, even for my own, financial future and all this stuff. I want all these things, but I recognize it's not safe right now. So I'm as conflicted as a lot of fans. And ultimately, I think this contrast between Dana and the larger issues is a struggle we're all dealing with right now. It's almost a microcosm of Dana's is part of the inner us who wants life back to normal. But these other forces out of our control are going, look, I don't care what you want. You're going to have to back off and just wait for this to be over for right now. And that's what's so interesting and fascinating about this whole conflict to me, and that we're seeing ourselves, right? How you see this pandemic and how you see what's going on reflects your opinion about whether or not the UFC should or should not have a show. It's divided like our society is divided in a lot of ways. It's a very interesting thing to watch unfold, and it's changing every freaking hour. This is the fourth time today I've been on air talking about this fight. I did SiriusXM this morning because we pre-record now because I do it from home. And we did a whole show. My boss called me, which is why we're doing this so late. My boss called me what was it, a couple hours ago, and said, the fight's off. We need to reshoot that whole thing. Well, RJ Clifford, who I did it with, couldn't do it. So I sat here at my computer. Producer called me and we recorded a whole new show because all the information we had a few hours ago doesn't mean anything now. So it's the nature of the sport and how we're rolling with the punches in the middle of this problem.
Well, I got to look back. What did I text you exactly? Hold on. I will spoil it. I text you, is this guy Dana fucking serious? That's what I put.
You did. Now, did you mean that about the whole, like, it's still going on, we're still doing the Fight Island? That's what I thought you were talking about. How he's insisting it's just postponed. We're still all the way in this. Well, he said a lot of that.
In a way, here's the deal, right? And this is how I think. Now, you're never going to convince me otherwise. In the first show, we talked about if you knew this was going to be on this tribal reservation, if you had 4 different places available, why on earth were you not getting Khabib to one of these places? Let's say you had 3 places, they were all in America. You knew you had to put this card together and protect it and save it. Why were you not putting him over here to begin with? So to me, that was the first step of some mismanagement here. Now you're outwardly coming out. I mean, let's be honest. He was defiant constantly, and he's using verbiage that really I struggle to grasp. He used the word battle. We are in a battle several times. Why are you saying that if ultimately what you learn is you're in the battle with your own line of business? You can't tell me that today, April 9th, at 4 p.m, was the day that the guy at Disney picked up the phone and called Dana White and said, listen, this horse and pony show shit is done. You're going to go on ESPN and you're going to tell them it's done. There's no way that this just happened now. We're having leaks, right, all week of where this is going to take place. Dana just confirmed the leaks, whether he likes it or not, because he said they're going to have a fight there in the future simply because of how they've backed it. So from a projected of, I guess, looking back at it, it just, none of this makes sense. I mean, I'm looking at the quote right now. This is from the video interview. I told you this whole thing has been a battle since day one. We've been fighting nonstop all day and all night since this thing started to put on this event on April 18th. And today, we got a call from the highest level you can go to at Disney and the highest level on ESPN. One thing that I've said since we started our relationship and partnership with ESPN, and it's been an incredible one, it's been an amazing partnership. ESPN has been, listen to all this petting he's doing. ESPN has been very, very good to us. Still going. And the powers that be there just asked me to stand down and not do this event next Saturday. Jimmy, there is no way. In someone that's worked at horrible businesses that have no communication from the management to the worker, there's no way this is the first time they've talked about this. There's no way. I won't believe it. It's a multi-billion-dollar organization. He had to have known. He was literally, when you talk about, it's a microcosm of what's going on, I agree with you from a mental standpoint. But from a business standpoint, this is a man that was fighting against the only company he's really brought into this. And now, when you look at it, I mean, how can you really take his word at face value? I'm not a big anti-Dana guy. I appreciate everything he's done. But at the same time, the gig is up. You don't have the control that you think you have. You don't have the capabilities that you think you have. You don't have the power that you want. You did, but it's gone. And now we know the cat's out of the bag, if you will. That's the most incredible part of all this. You're absolutely right. He made all of us reshoot our days in media for nothing to do. But this, I will never believe that today was the first day they approached him and said, hey, listen, this is probably a bad idea. You need to stop.
There is one thing that might change your mind. And this is what I thought of. Right before the announcement came out, Dianne Feinstein, senator in California, longtime Democratic senator in California, had an open letter saying that the UFC shouldn't have this event, that the tribe in charge should not allow this on their land, that they couldn't do anything about it because it is tribal land, but they hoped the UFC and the tribe would not allow this to happen. That's a lot of political heat. And it happened right before Dana White. Now, the timing's different. I don't know when this letter came out as opposed to when it was read. I read it literally a few minutes before this announcement came out. That's serious political heat in a state where Disney does a lot of business. That may have tipped the scales. I agree with you. They had discussions before this. I'm sure there were discussions between Disney, ESPN, and UFC about the heat they were taking on this. A senator coming out and saying, I strongly suggest you don't do this, may have been too much for them. And that may have been, or she may have called the president of Disney and go, hey, crack the whip here. We don't want this happening in our state. You like Disneyland being in Anaheim and the status you guys get, and who knows, the tax breaks? Hey, call your boy Dana and rein this in. That's enough political juice that the president of Disney could call and go, put a kibosh on this right now. That's certainly possible. That I agree with. That, like when you say there's no way this should happen right now, an open letter from the senator of California, that has some weight with the powers that be at ESPN and Disney. That could have been the tipping of the scale to me.
I would agree with you, but only once the letter went public. I think that letter was set behind closed doors several times, and it really wouldn't surprise me.
Think there could have been a call?
I think initially, maybe even, who knows? Maybe they looked at Anaheim. Maybe they were like, listen, Goofy and Minnie ain't doing anything this weekend. How about they hold the camera up for this fight? Why don't we have it there? I'm sure they had a building that's not being used, but it just seems to me like the pressure needed to be shown publicly. And you said it. You honestly, to your credit, you may have been the first one that said it. This was going to come down to a political issue. If the state is telling us what we can't do, and then you're allowing all this to take place, well, if it's normal for them, then guess what's going to be normal for me, my day to day. So, stick your curfew, stick your regulations. I'll go where I want, when I want, how I want. And if you don't like it, maybe you shouldn't let this event take place here. But I can't imagine that they hadn't put behind closed doors ceases on this, because it's interesting that Dana just continued to be aggressively. Would you say that he was aggressively defiant in this?
Yeah. The idea that they went to California really surprised me. I honestly have to say, I was like, wow, even tribal land in California, where the California State Athletic Commission and the states, the senator from the state have no authority on tribal land, you're still thumbing your nose at a very powerful state that you do a lot of business with. I thought that was a ballsy move. I really thought when they said this is going to be out west, I thought Oregon and Idaho were the two that popped out to me. I was like, there's no way they could have it in Washington. That's a real hot spot. California, there's no way they do that even on tribal land, just because, once again, you're kind of thumbing your nose at the powers that be in a very powerful state. And I think that kind of backfired on them. I think once they got state senators involved and state government involved, somebody called Disney and went, you really want to piss off California, where they keep Disneyland, where you have all your film studios, where you do a ton of business? It's not worth it. So I really think selecting that site, even though it was on tribal land, I don't think that was a good idea. I think they kind of kicked the hornet's nest with that one.
Yeah, should have had that private island ready to go. How bad did they screw Justin? How bad did they screw Justin Gaethje on this? I mean, personally, I feel quite a bit. I mean, again, in the face of logic, Dana continued to stare it and just say, no, I really thought, I mean, it's good that Gaethje got a lot of publicity, but let's be fair, a lot of things now have to fall in place for this fight to happen. It's very likely that they won't continue to rush this card. We'd mentioned on the show that will only be heard on podcast again, very blatant cheap plug. They don't have to throw together a card anymore. They can actually take their time and put together the fights that we want in a time frame where we may be better equipped to pay for them. So in a way, there are some blessings here. But do you feel like this one was really, an opportunity Justin was ready and prepared to take advantage of, and now seeing it go away is just, there's no one that intentionally did this, but I think it goes back to, again, you were making promises that you couldn't keep to the fans and to your fighters. And at some point that has to leave a negative impression with people.
Yeah, I think it might not be good for a lot of fans. I think for Justin Gaethje, it's the best thing that could happen. Sure, he could have beaten Tony Ferguson and pulled off a big upset, but next fight he'll be a lot. He was a guy who stood up and stepped in last minute. He earned some brownie points with the fans. He earned some brownie points with UFC. He didn't have to fight an incredibly dangerous fighter on short notice. He'll be better prepared next time around. I think there's a lot of, and I'm sure they slid him some money. I'm sure he's going to get paid something, even if it's just, a stipend for his training camp or something. He's going to get paid something. So I think that the outcome is good for Justin Gaethje in the long run.
And to close this out with the long run for the UFC overall, we've speculated for what seems like 2 weeks now how this could be perceived various different ways. Do you feel like, although, as we mentioned at length here, the fans may be a little bit negative, they may be a little bit turned back, I feel like they're probably all going to welcome the idea once fight cards come back. Do you feel like, though, this is the best way it could have ended for the UFC? Because now at least we're assured, I would think there will be as little controversy and problems as seemingly possible.
Yes, and Dana fought to the bitter end. He fought come hell or high water. He wanted this fight. It just couldn't. His boss pulled the card on him, essentially. So he saves face in that he fought for the fans and the fighters, depending on how you see this, obviously, all the way till the end. It wasn't his fault, but he did everything he could. So this is probably the best ending for everybody all the way around.
I would agree. And that seems like the best ending for this actual podcast that will be on YouTube. Do you want to hear the first podcast? Again, shameless plug, third time. We never do it, but we will now. You can go over to our Podbean. You can go to Apple iTunes. You can hear that and know that while we were doing that, it's very likely, Jimmy, while that was being recorded, either Mickey or Goofy or possibly Pluto was on the phone with Dana White telling them, listen, you can't do this. It's a small world we live in, right? So with that said, I know that we always say this, but we really do hope you guys continue to abide by your sanctions, do everything to keep your family safe and healthy. We appreciate you listening to this, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.